and Director of Karachi Literature Festival, Managing Director, Oxford University Press, Pakistan, to give the closing speech.
Dr. Arfa Sayyida Zahra Sahiba, Ziauddin Sardar Sahab, Dr. Arif Farooqi Sahab, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. At the conclusion of the Karachi Literature Festival, let us pause for a moment to consider its purposes. Since this was a festival, those purposes include variety, excitement, and delight. Variety in the many different ideas, thoughts, and concepts that have surfaced, excitement of the intellect and imagination, and sheer delight at the pleasure that only intelligent discourse can bring. The impact of the 3 days of discussion and discourse has been touching and absolutely astonishing, because I find that last year in 2015, we had 125,000 people. This year we have clearly exceeded that number. And I'm always told that people are losing interest in books and reading, but I always deny that, because we survive in Pakistan, Oxford University Press, by publishing and selling books. Our entire operations are run on the revenue that we get by publishing books. So somebody must be buying them and reading them. So I don't think that the reading habit is declining. Of course, the formats in which people are reading are gradually changing, very, very gradually, not as fast as one imagined some time ago. But we are the publishers of content, and we can produce it in any format that our readers would like. What really made me happy was that the discerning Pakistani voice was being heard in the halls of the Karachi Literature Festival. There were questions being asked. People were not passively listening to people speaking or giving talks. They were actually challenging them and asking them questions. And that is what provided us with moments of self-recognition for Pakistan. During the year, we suffered the loss of Abdullah Hussain, who used to grace our Karachi and Islamabad literature festivals. We were also, all of us, very, very deeply grieved and saddened by the passing of one of our greatest poets and man of letters, Jamiluddin Ali Sahab, who served the cause of Urdu for many decades. We were also saddened by the passing of Naseem Anjum Bhatti Sahiba. The death of our distinguished Urdu writer Intizar Hussain 3 days before the festival not only deprived us of one of our finest speakers, but left behind a void in the literary culture and a lot of sadness in our hearts. I hope that in time, more Intizar Hussains and more Jamiluddin Alis and more Abdullah Hussains and Anjum Bhatti and more such gifted authors will emerge from our young writers. And I would ask them to read a lot, because it is only when you read a lot will you begin to write. At Oxford University Press and at the Karachi Literature Festival, we have been trying consistently to encourage young writers. This year, we increased the number of annual awards for writing, and we saw the launch of the 4th award, the Karachi Literature Festival Urdu Fiction and Non-Fiction Prize, an award supported by Infaq Foundation. We also announced the Italy Reads Pakistan Award, in which a Pakistani novel will be selected for translation into Italian and for publication in Italy. So some of Pakistan's literary heritage will enter Italy and hopefully Europe. I'm also delighted that we have had with us over these 3 days Kathy and Sarah Jane from the Manchester Literature Festival. They have been attending this festival and we have been talking about collaboration. And again, we hope that next year at the Karachi Literature Festival, we will have a session that will be curated by the Manchester Literature Festival. And in Manchester, we will curate a session of the Karachi Literature Festival. So I'm very excited about this initiative. I would like to thank all our speakers, including those, especially those who have traveled all the way from Italy, France, the UK, the US, India, and distant parts of Pakistan to enrich and inspire our audience. As for our audience, as for all of you, I have no words to thank you for your enthusiastic response and for your love and support. Your joy in the event was itself a joy to watch, and that was our biggest reward. I'd like to thank all our sponsors who have helped make the Karachi Literature Festival a success and who have actually, without them, we could not have managed. So a big thank you to USAID-funded Pakistan Reading Project, who are our title sponsors. The Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Embassy of France, the Consulate General of France, the Alliance Française, the Embassy of Germany in Islamabad, the United Bank Limited, UBL, who also gave the UBL Literary Awards here at the Karachi Literature Festival, the US Consulate General, Karachi, the British Deputy High Commission, the British High Commission in Islamabad, the Embassy of Italy in Islamabad, the Consulate of Italy in Karachi, the Goethe Institute, Lifebuoy Soap, Lipton Tea, Lay's Chips, Coca-Cola, the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, the South Asian Institute, University of Texas in Austin, the British Council, Tehzeeb Foundation, and Art Now. I should also have mentioned that, again, we were deeply saddened by the passing of Kamal Ahmad Rizvi earlier in the just about a month ago. May his soul rest in peace. I would also like to thank our security agency and the Karachi police for their wonderful support and for making us all safe and secure, and Niaz Ahmed Siddiqui Sahab. I'd like to thank the wonderful, the talented, the brilliant Karachi Literature Festival team for their hard work in putting together this festival. Rahila Baqai, Zehra Naseem Haq, Muniza Ali, Anika Khokar, Sumair Qureshi, Aman Aziz, Felix Kandara, Aman's team, Batul Nasir, Salma Adil, Sunita Wadia, and Nadia Ghani. A big thank you to Pomi Gohar and the Phenomena team for the beautiful flower arrangements on the stage and in the festival. Thank you to the Avari family for the personal interest that they have taken in looking after all the arrangements, in helping us with the arrangements, and in looking after all our guests, and especially to Dinshaw Avari. I would like to thank Seema and Tahir Khan. I would also like to thank the Mayor Designate of Karachi, Mr. Wasim Akhtar, for his support. Many thanks to the Manhattan team and the electronic and print media, and all our young and wonderful volunteers. Our volunteers have done a great job. And once again, a big thank you to our speakers who have, I think, done a brilliant job, who have kept us totally enthralled and engrossed in their words. And last but not the least, thank you all, dear audience, for your presence here and for your support. Assalamu alaikum.
May I request Dr. Asif Farooqi, co-founder Karachi Literature Festival, to give his closing speech.
Professor Arfa Sayyida Zahra and Ziauddin Sardar Sahab, ladies and gentlemen, dignitaries, writers and readers, Khawateen aur Hazrat, Assalamu alaikum. This finally is the time of parting, time to take our leave and say goodbye for 1 year. The saddest part of any festival is its closing. How one keeps wishing for more, a little bit more of what we have been through in 3 days filled with events, conversation, books and friends. But this goodbye is temporary. The festival of books and the celebration of readings never ends. It opens up and continues in our lives. And the enrichment is what we take back from festivals such as this one. As the festivities end, we know that there were many things which worked and some things which could have been better. The work of the organizers is not complete even when the tents and the additional chairs in the halls are folded up, which they will soon be. And they are all stored in some place for use again after a year. We will be gathering and eagerly waiting for comments and feedback from you, and this will form the basis of our planning for 2017. I'm already looking forward to 2017 and even beyond. Please share your comments and what is even more important, your recommendations. एक बात मैं और कहना चाहता हूँ, इस फेस्टिवल के ख़ात्मे का ख्याल आने से ही मेरा दिल जैसे सहमा जा रहा था और मुझे ये एहसास हो रहा था कि ये गहमा गहमी, ये लोगों की रौनक, ये हंगामे, ये किताबें, ये दोस्तों से बातें, ये जब ख़त्म हो जाएंगे तो फिर एक खला आकर डराएगा और ये एहसास होगा कि कौन से लोग हमारे साथ थे जो बिछड़ गए और जिनको हम याद करते रहे जो आज हमारे साथ नहीं हैं, जैसे इंतज़ार साहब। लेकिन दोपहर के वक्त मैं जब ये ख़याल लेके दिल में इस यहाँ पे जो प्राइज़ सेरेमनी हो रही थी उससे उतर के जा रहा था तो एक नौजवान वॉलंटियर ने मुझे एक बंद पैकेट दिया और ये कहा कि ये गिव अवे है एंड दिस इज़ फ्रॉम मिस्टर इंतज़ार हुसैन। मैं हैरान रह गया। उस सेरेमनी में जो गिव अवे था वो इंतज़ार साहब की किताबें थीं जिनको वॉलंटियर ये बता रही थी कि दिस इज़ अ गिफ्ट फ्रॉम इंतज़ार हुसैन। सो जो इंतज़ार साहब, अब्दुल्ला हुसैन, नसरीन अंजुम भट्टी, इन जैसे अदीबों का जो गिफ्ट है, जो बाउंटी है, जो हमारी ज़िंदगियों को माला माल करने का अमल है, वो तो शायद फ़ेस्टिवल के साथ ख़त्म नहीं होता, वो तो शायद फ़ेस्टिवल के बाद जारी रहता है। और मुझे उस पर एक बात याद आई, हज़रत निज़ामुद्दीन औलिया का एक वाक़या। मैं उनकी शख्सियत से कोई मुशाबहत तो तलाश बहरहाल नहीं कर रहा, लेकिन उनके बहुत बड़े अक़ीदतमंद थे अमीर खुसरो। अमीर खुसरो को एक अरसे के लिए दिल्ली से बाहर जाना पड़ा और उनको ये अंदाज़ा हो गया कि जब वो आएंगे तो उनकी मुलाकात आलम खाकी में मुमकिन नहीं होगी। वो वापस आए दिल्ली और उन्होंने कहा कि मुझे हज़रत की खिदमत में ले चलो। वो वहाँ पहुँचे तो एक मिट्टी के ढेर की तरफ इशारा किया गया कि ये हैं, इनको देख लो। कहा जाता है कि अमीर खुसरो ने उस पर एक दोहा पढ़ा। अब मुझे नहीं मालूम कि ये दोहा उनसे मंसूब करना दुरुस्त है या तहक़ीक़ के एतबार से गलत है, लेकिन इतना मैंने ज़रूर देखा है कि ये दोहा उनके मज़ार पर लिखा हुआ है और जो लोग हज़रत निज़ामुद्दीन औलिया को सलाम करने जाते हैं वो अमीर खुसरो की कब्र, उनका मज़ार और उस पर ये दोहा लिखा हुआ ज़रूर पढ़ते हैं। ये दोहा मैं इंतज़ार हुसैन साहब की नज़र करना चाहता हूँ। गोरी सोवे सेज पर और मुख पर डारे केस, गोरी सोवे सेज पर और मुख पर डारे केस, खुसरो चल घर आपने सांझ भय चौंदेस। सांझ हो गई है, खुदा हाफिज़।
May I request Mr. Ziauddin Sardar, author, broadcaster, futurist, cultural critic, and internationally renowned public intellectual, to give his keynote speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Gentle ladies and gentlemen, you may be or you may not be surprised to know that I have attended numerous festivals all over the world. But I have never attended a festival like the Karachi Literary Festival. Why do I say that? Well, on the first day when I was still sleeping in my bed, the telephone rang and I picked up the phone and there was a young voice at the other end. He said, "I am your minder." I said, I didn't know that I needed a minding, but nevertheless, I don't mind being minded. And this wonderful young man has been minding me for the last 3 days. I really like to thank him wherever he is. Which suggests, does it not, that the tradition of hospitality is still alive in Karachi. Then, when I go to a festival, what do I see? Whether even European countries, Australia, Hong Kong, the proceedings are always in English. The local language is aside in a room. So you will have, if you go, for example, to Ubud Literary Festival in Bali, the proceedings are in English, and the Indonesian literature is discussed in small rooms amongst the select few. At Karachi Literary Festival, the dominant mode of communication is Urdu. The local language takes a center stage, which makes me very nervous, because when I was sitting here at the inaugural speeches and on several sessions afterwards, everything was in Urdu. And I said to myself, maybe I should make an effort and give a speech in Urdu. I tried with this for about half a day. And I even consulted some of the organizers. But I have a problem, is that I think in English. I can speak and understand Urdu, but I think in English. Now that's a very interesting point, because I think with English concepts and categories. In other words, my way of looking at the world is very specific to a particular culture and civilization, which means that I only know one way of being human. A language is a worldview. We don't think in vacuum. We think with concepts, with ideas, with categories. And language provides you with that, with all those categories to think with. And a language opens up a whole new world. So suddenly, I have discovered at this festival that I am not a complete human being. Well, that's quite a realization. I'll come to that later on. There's another thing I discovered. In every festival I go, I see people who speak about literature. Only at Karachi Literary Festival, I have seen people who speak literature. When the two Zaras open their mouth, Zara Nega and Arifa Zara, literature comes out of their mouth. I've never seen that anywhere at any festival in all of this, the best possible of all worlds. So, I'm dumbfounded. I find myself thinking in categories which are only within one culture and civilization. I find that I cannot really give a speech in Urdu, for which I have to apologize. So what could I do? So I thought maybe I should provide or let you know what other lessons I've learned while I've been here. And in the process, maybe comment on one or two things that I have heard. When in the beginning, Asim Farooqi Saab asked, what is the book that inspired you in a childhood? He said, every one of us have a book that have inspired in childhood. Now, that is a question I've been asked, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of times. I'm a writer. I mean, a journalist comes along, one of the first idiotic questions he asks is, who inspires you, what book? And my normal answer is, Animal Farm, Auntie Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, all that. And when he raised the question, I was thinking, Animal Farm. And then Pervez Hudbai said something very interesting. उन्होंने एक मजाकिया अंदाज में कहा कि इस मुल्क में नसीम हिजाजी के नावल छपते हैं. It was a comment on history, to which I will come later. Naseem Hijazi, suddenly Aakhri Chatan, Shaheen. Now that must have resided in a very deep part of my memory, because I left Pakistan when I was 10 years old, and my entire life after that was based in London. Now, then other names started to emerge. A.R. Khatun's Chashma. I don't know anybody has ever heard of a writer called Sadiq Siddiqui, who wrote a beautiful book called Anlus Ke Do Chand, which I remember. And of course, Ibn Safi B.A. Now, it has to be said that I did not read these books, except Ibn Safi. These books were read to me. So when I was young, about 6 or 7 years old, we lived to live in Sahiwal. And my grandmother was absolutely obsessed with reading novels. Right? But her obsession was not just limited to reading, she had to read it to other people too. And often the only other victim in the house was myself at 6 years old. So I remember sitting in Sahiwal in the room, absolutely boiling hot room, right, with a little kind of collection of mangoes on the other side, which was basically there as a bribe, and then she was reading Chashma or Aakhri Chatan to me. And my reward will be the mangoes if I sat there all day, which was not an easy task for a 6 years old. And when I lived in Bhawalnagar, my grandfather, Hakim Abdul Razik Khan, I was slightly older then, kind of made me go and buy every month a copy of the Jasusi Digest, Imran series, not Hamidi Faridi, Imran series. And then he will sit in the veranda and I had to read the whole, the latest episode of Imran to him. So I said, no, I have not been shaped by Animal Farm or Jane Austen or all the other stuff that. I've been shaped by these writers. So the person you see standing before you, who is regarded as a critic, somebody who questions everything, was not shaped by reading Western classics. He was shaped by reading popular Pakistani literature. Now that's a very strange realization. I've learned something quite profound about myself. The other thing I learned is this has to be said, this is a sense of humility. Now we folks who come from London or New York, from the Olympian heights of the West, we kind of come here and say, oh, you local buggers, you know bugger all. We are the folks who know everything. I mean, in fact, even your local writers have to go and publish in English and get an award there before you will recognize them. So we. But then I was standing in the back here for 40 minutes listening to Anwar Masood. Now, what a phenomenal genius. What a man. I've spent, and many of the young scholars here trained in the West, spent years trying to deconstruct and critique modernity progress. And this man, sitting on this stage, in 30 seconds, completely undid our work. He read a poem called Saban, where the Saban, a bar of soap, is going to reduce in size and is sold for twice the value and is called super soap. If this is not a critique of neoliberalism, I don't know what is. That is a profound critique of neoliberalism in just one little couplet. It takes me a month to write a paper and 2 or 3 years to write a book. That's some achievement. I remember trying to write an article on development. A lot of us are very obsessed with development. Pakistan needs to be developed and all that. I had written quite a number of articles on development. I was I thought maybe I'm repeating myself. And when you start thinking that you're repeating yourself, it's probably the best time to stop and do something else. But I still had to write this yet another article on development, and I wanted to write something totally different and original, and I just couldn't find a beginning. I spent 2 or 3 months working on this, and I just couldn't find a beginning. Then somebody gave me a cassette, one of the audio cassettes. He said, you should listen to this, just for fun. He's a Pakistani poet. So I started listening to this cassette, and it was Anwar Masood. And he had a poem called Banyan. Everybody knows about Banyan. And I listened to the poem, and I rewind and listened to him again, and I rewind and listened to it again. I must have listened to it 15 times, and I said, shit, this is exactly what I said, shit, this is the best criticism of development anybody can ever write, right? Because you look at it, Banyan, you take development from the West, you try to wear it, it doesn't fit, right? And if it actually fits, it destroys the society that when you're trying to remove it. It has no value. And the poem ends with some notion of kind of authenticity, that you need something indigenous, And in fact, the essay begins with this poem. And I noticed yesterday and also on YouTube that he said there is a professor in Oxford who has written about this poem. And he says that this is Western, a comment on Western culture. So I met him on the bus going back to dinner, and I said, I am that professor who wrote about your poem, which was quite an interesting incident. So these are the 2 things that I have learned, 2 major things, that there's more of Pakistan in me than I realize, and that we who come from outside ought to be a bit more humble, because here there are some profound gems that we can find. There were a couple of other things that I would like to mention, and that is, amongst various kind of sessions and discussions I note, there is a tension. There is a tension between, let's say, those who are of the Islamic persuasion, and let us say those who are of the secular, modern persuasion, liberal persuasion. And in a number of places I've heard that we live in history, that Pakistanis live in history. We are always looking back. Even Pervez Khutbah in his opening speech said that we actually live in history. I would like to suggest that we do not live in history. We live in a manufactured past, in a romanticized past that is often presented in utopian terms. Now that is something completely different from history. How has this romanticized past come about? Well, I bought a copy of this book, The Murder of History by K.K. Aziz, very well known, highly respected, brilliant historian of Pakistan. And at the back of the book, as an introduction to the content of the book, it says, what is being taught as history in Pakistani schools and colleges is really national mythology. And the subjects of social studies and Pakistani studies are nothing but vehicles of political indoctrination. Our children don't learn history. They are ordered to read a carefully selected collection of falsehoods, fairy tales, and plain lies. That's manufactured history. That's where we live. We don't live in history. Now, much of the same can be said about Islamic history. Much of what we regard as Islamic history is fabricated history, is manufactured utopia, right? Where things existed in some form of perfection. And the most interesting thing is, exactly the same can be said about the history of liberal and secular thought. So my message to both sides, those of Islamic persuasion and those of liberal and secular persuasion, is maybe the best way to move forward is to be a little bit more self-critical and look at the mythologies that you yourself have created. And what you are often selling is a manufactured, fabricated entity than something real and significant. Now, this is a festival, and as an example that actually our history, our traditions are very, very rich and diverse. Right? The real tragedy is we do not know our history and our traditions. As an example, and since this is a literary festival, I would like you to transport you to another literary place 1,000 years from now. I would like you to close your eyes. Thank you very much for the 3 people who did. I would like you to close your eyes and imagine that you are in late 10th century Baghdad. You know Baghdad, the city built in 1776. Let me just got some of my dates wrong. I'm very bad at dates. the city built in 762 by Khalifa al-Mansur, the Abbasid Khalifa al-Mansur. So if you're going towards the Tigris, the city is on the west side of the Tigris, right? But keep your eyes closed. But I don't want you to turn west. I want you to turn east of Tigris, because there's a new city called Baghdad Jadid, which has also emerged, which emerges almost 50 years after the establishment of the old Baghdad. And we walk in this city, which has a population of about 2 million and a diameter of 12 meters across. And as we enter the past, we see a huge library. And this is the famous the House of Wisdom, the Baitul Hikmah Library. But we don't want to go in the Baitul Hikmah Library. We want to carry on for about half a mile. And then we are in a bazaar. This is Suq Warakan, the souk of the booksellers. And if we started counting, as a famous historian Yaqut did, he lost count after 100. There are 100 bookshops in this area. But we want to go into one particular bookshop. So we go to this big shop, which is a huge structure with 3 or 4 floors. If those of you who know London and London's foils, it's 3 or 4 times as big as foils. This is a huge bookshop, right? And we go in the bookshop, right? And there is a coffee area, sitting area, and there are various people sitting, reading, discussing, debating themselves, amongst themselves. And there are various other places where you find copiers, people who copy books, the waraqeen, the human photocopy machines, who could copy a book, in fact a sizable book, in half a day or a day. It was really big in couple of days. And there are lots of other activities going on. This is the bookshop of Ibn al-Nadim. Now, in the bookshop of Ibn al-Nadim, there is something which even foil doesn't have. It is the catalog of al-Nadim. It's the catalog of all the books that he actually has in his bookshop. The old bookshops used to have a catalog, but nowadays even foils doesn't have a catalog. And then we sit down and we say, let's look at the catalog. What is he selling? What can we buy from him? But first, let us read the subtitle of the book, of this catalog. The catalog is called Fahrist al-Nadim, and the subtitle reads, an index of the books of all nations, Arabs and non-Arabs alike, which are extant in the Arabic language and script, on every branch of knowledge, comprising information as to their compilers and the classes of their authors, together with their genealogies of those persons, the dates of their birth, the length of their lives, the times of their death, in places to which they belong, their merits and their faults, since the beginning, on every science that has been invented down to the present epoch, namely the year 377 of Hijrah, which is 987. Impressive bookshop, right? Vast collection, including books on Chinese classics, books of Indian classics, Greek philosophy. Actually, this particular bookshop specializes on Mu'tazilite philosophy, all sorts of things. But let's just look at the catalog a bit further and just see what sort of books he is selling. If I can take out. Well, the authors we are going to pick out are actually alive during the time of Al-Nadim. The first book that catches our eye is called The Book of Animals by Al-Jahiz. Al-Jahiz was a wonderful literary personality. He had something wrong with one of his eyes, so he was known as goggle-eyed. Phenomenal personality. So we look at the Book of Animals, and we discover something very strange, that actually Al-Jahiz, when he's looking at animals and categorizing and classifying them, he has some understanding, not total, some understanding of genetic mutation and some idea of evolution. Now, a lot of work has been done on Al-Jahiz, and you can check all that out. He has some idea of evolution. So here is a text in the late 10th century where some notion of evolution is being discussed compared to that what is happening in our society today. There is the poetry of Abu Nawas, the companion of Harun al-Rashid. Now, anybody who knows anything about Abu Nawas, they know two things. He's a raging gay and an arch atheist. They all read his poetry. Nobody questions his sexual orientation or the fact that how much iman he has or does not have. Right? They're reading his poetry. They're buying. Then we have books by Ibn al-Muqafa. Who's writing about current political problems, and he says that the kings are using Islam as a political instrument to increase their power and territory and control over the masses. There. And then you have a book by Ibn Kuntaya, who is a bit tired of the commentaries on the Quran, and he says, why are not people looking for alternative interpretations to the Quran? And then you have books by free thinkers, skeptics, and all sorts of things. So the point I am making, particularly to my brothers and sisters from the liberal and secular tradition, please do not be so hasty to dismiss Islamic history and tradition simply because your knowledge of Islamic history and tradition are the fabrication and the lies that is presented as Islamic history. You ought to make an effort to read. Our tradition is so enormously rich that it is really spellbinding. Now, of course, I'm not saying this because I want you to suffer from nostalgia. I mean, those people who say Muslims have discovered everything in history because this is just rubbish. That's what I mean by one fabrication. But there is real substance, real knowledge in our history and tradition. Why do we know that? Why do we need to know that? Why? Because history tells you where you are coming from. It gives you a sense of identity. But more important, history tells you, listen to my words, history tells you where you ought to be. Unless we have real historic consciousness, right, where are we going to go? Well, we are going to buy all those manufactured banyans in America and Britain and Europe and try to wear them in our society. And it hasn't worked for the last 60 years. I doubt it if it will work in the future. Finally, I like to end by telling you a little anecdote. And as a favor to myself, I will try and tell it in Urdu. چند سال پہلے میں روم کے ایئرپورٹ پہ بیٹھا ہوا تھا، تو مجھے پاکستانیوں سے کچھ خوف سا ہے کہ جہاں دنیا میں جاؤ پاکستانی نظر آتے ہیں، اور میں پاکستانیوں سے بھاگتا ہوں. تو روم کے ایئرپورٹ پہ مجھے کوئی پاکستانی نظر نہیں آیا. میں نے کہا الحمدللہ، تھینک گاڈ. میں بیٹھ گیا اپنی فلائٹ کا انتظار کرنے کے. دو ڈھائی گھنٹے تھے. جیسے ہی میں نے کہا کہ اللہ کا لاکھ لاکھ کا شکر ہے یہاں کوئی پاکستانی نہیں ہے، دو بزرگ دور سے مجھے نظر آئے. ایک بھائی صاحب اپنی بیگم کے ساتھ، کلیئرلی پاکستانی. میں نے کہا یہاں بھی خدا نے نہیں بچایا، میری طرف آتے ہیں. انہوں نے بھی دیکھ لیا کہ بھئی یہی پاکستانی پوری ایئرپورٹ پہ ہے. مجھے بھی نظر آ گیا وہی پاکستانی ہے. تو وہ میری طرف آئے اور کافی دیر کے بعد آئے، انہوں نے سلام دعا کیا اور فوراً میرے ساتھ بیٹھ گئے. تو میں نے کہا بزرگ السلام علیکم، آپ کہاں سے آ رہے ہیں؟ کہنے لگے میں ٹیرا ڈیل فیوگا سے آ رہا ہوں. میں نے کہا ٹیرا ڈیل فیوگا تو وہ نہیں ساؤتھ امریکہ کے بالکل کونے کے پیچھے جو آرکٹک سرکل کے، جی کہاں وہیں سے آ رہا ہوں. میں نے کہا اسی واسطے آپ اتنے تھکے ہوئے لگتے ہیں. کہنے لگے نہیں یہ تو عمر کا وہ ہے. میں نے کہا آپ وہاں کیا کر رہے تھے؟ کہنے لگے کہ میں ایک برج بنا رہا ہوں. ٹیرا ڈیل فیوگا کے درمیان ٹو آئلینڈ ہیں، ان کے درمیان ایک بڑا، ہاں کہ یہ تو بہت مشکل کام ہوا. کہنے لگا ہاں بہت بڑا اور بہت پیچیدہ انجینئرنگ پروجیکٹ ہے اور میں اس کو لیڈ کر رہا ہوں اور میں یہ برج بنا رہا ہوں. میں نے کہا ٹھیک ہے. پھر وہ چلے گئے. پھر میں نے سوچا کہ یار ان پاکستانیوں سے دنیا میں کوئی نہیں بچ سکتا. جہاں جاؤ گے پاکستانی ملے گا، اور پاکستانی ہر کام کر سکتا ہے. ٹیرا ڈیل فیوگا میں برج بھی بنا سکتا ہے، مگر وہ پاکستان میں کوئی کام نہیں کر سکتا. اب وہ وقت آ گیا ہے کہ پاکستانیوں کو پاکستان میں کام کرنا ہے. اینڈ آئی تھنک کہ the Billion Karachi Literary Festival is a very good place to start. Thank you very much.
May I now request Ms. Arfa Saida Zehra, an eminent professional, an educationist, gender specialist, and human rights activist, to give her keynote speech.
امین سید صاحبہ، ضیاء سردار صاحب، جناب آصف فروخی، خواتین و حضرات، یہ وقت توڑ کا وقت ہے اور اس میں طوالت کی اب گنجائش نہیں رہی. مجھے کہنا یہ ہے کہ آپ لوگوں کے پاس اس پروگرام کے 2 نسخے پہنچے ہوں گے. پتہ یہ چلا کہ شکل میری زیادہ ضروری ہے. اس جشن کے پروگرام کے 2 نسخے آپ تک پہنچے ہوں گے. ایک میں نام کسی اور کا تھا، ان کو اجازت نہ ملی تو قسمت نے وہ اجازت نامہ میرے نام کھول دیا. مجھے اب اپنی قسمت پر خود رشک آنے لگا ہے کہ جو کچھ نہ سوچوں کبھی وہ بھی ہو سکتا ہے. میں بات یہاں سے شروع کرنا چاہتی ہوں کہ کون کہتا ہے کہ پاکستان میں پاکستانی کام نہیں کرتے؟ ضیاء سردار صاحب، میری گستاخی معاف، یہ بات آپ پاکستان سے رہ باہر رہ کر اور پاکستان میں واپس آ کر کہہ سکتے ہیں، جو اس عالم سے گزرتا ہے ہر گھڑی کی پھانس اس کی سانس میں اٹکتی ہے، وہ جانتا ہے کہ یہاں کام کیسے ہوتا ہے۔ میری بات تو جانے دیجئے، یہ خاتون یہاں بیٹھی، نام ان کا امینہ سید ہے، آکسفورڈ یونیورسٹی پریس کی، اگر میں غلط عہدے کا نام لے دوں تو امینہ معاف کر دیجیے گا، عہدوں سے میرے پر جلتے ہیں، مینیجنگ ڈائریکٹر ہیں۔ جب وہ یہاں آئیں، آکسفورڈ یونیورسٹی پریس ایک مردہ گھوڑا تھا، اور لوگ سمجھتے تھے کہ یہ طلسم ہوش ربا کی شہزادی کون سا چابک لے کر آئے گی جس سے یہ مردہ گھوڑا کھڑا ہو جائے گا۔ وہ مردہ گھوڑا کھڑا بھی ہوا، ہنہنانے بھی لگا، کچھ دن ہنہنایا اور پھر دوڑنے لگا، اور پھر ایک اور کمال ہوا، کہ پاکستان میں ادب کے جشن ہونے لگے، اور ادب کے معنی بہت بڑے ہیں۔ ادب دراصل تہذیب کا آئینہ ہے، تو رقص بھی ہے، شعر بھی ہے، ڈرامہ بھی ہے، فلم بھی ہے، میری اور آپ کی بات بھی ہے۔ لوگ مجھ سے کہتے ہیں، ابھی بھی کہتے ہیں، کہ اس ملک میں کبھی تبدیلی نہیں آئے گی۔ میں ان سے کہتی ہوں کہ یہ تبدیلی کا 7واں سال ہے، یہ انقلاب تمہیں کیوں نہیں نظر آتا؟ اور یہ باتیں میں اس لیے نہیں کر رہی ہوں کہ امینہ مجھے اگلے سال ضرور اس جشن ادب میں بلائیں گی، لیکن کبھی کبھی وہ سچ بھی بول لینا چاہیے جو مصلحت کے خلاف ہو، اور میری مصلحت کے خلاف ہے، لیکن یہ بات برملا کہنے کی ہے کہ امینہ سید نے جشن ادب کی بنیاد ڈالی، اور پھر اس بنیاد کے پیچھے بہت لوگ لپکے۔ اگر یہ انقلاب نہیں ہے تو کیا انقلاب ہے؟ اور صرف لاہور اور اسلام آباد، اور پہلی بات کہ ہم پاکستانیوں کو ایک لفظ میسر آیا، اور وہ ہے جشن۔ ہم تو اب اس معاشرے میں تقریباً زندہ ہیں جہاں مسکرانا حرام ہو جائے گا، وہ فتویٰ آنے کو ہے، لیکن جشن منتا ہے، لاہور میں آتا ہے، اسلام آباد جاتی ہیں امینہ، فیصل آباد پہنچا، بھاولپور پہنچا، ملتان پہنچا، کہاں نہیں پہنچا۔ ایک بات پتہ چلی کہ اس وطن میں ایک دل کے لگنے کی کلی ہے، کوئی اس کلی کو ذرا سا پانی دے دے تو ہر گلی کوچے میں کھل سکتی ہے۔ امینہ میں آپ کی بہت ممنون ہوں۔ مجھے یہ بھی یاد ہے کہ جب پہلا جشن ہوا تھا تو ہم اس کو زیادہ تر انگریزی میں منا رہے تھے، کیونکہ ہم نے سوچا کہ جشن تو انگریزی ہی میں من سکتا ہے، اردو میں شاید جشن منانے کی قوت بھی نہیں ہے، لیکن جتنی قوت اپنی تہذیب کے اظہار میں ہوتی ہے کسی دوسری چیز میں نہیں ہوتی۔ میں ایک بات اور بھی کہنا چاہتی ہوں، میں بہت معمولی طالب علم ہوں ادب کی اور تاریخ کی، اور اس سے زیادہ معمولی طالب علم ہوں زندگی کی، لیکن تینوں چیزوں کے لیے بہت حریص ہوں، بہت لالچی۔ زندگی بے حد اچھی لگتی ہے کیونکہ سب سے بڑی نعمت ہے، اور باقی ہر چیز کے معنی اسی سے پیدا ہوتے ہیں۔ تاریخ اس لیے اچھی لگتی ہے کہ آئینہ بن کے سامنے کھڑی رہتی ہے کہ چاہو تو لڑکھڑاتے رہو، اور چاہو تو ثابت قدمی سے خود کو درست کر کے آگے بڑھ جاؤ۔ آپ دیکھیے، تاریخ انتخاب اور اختیار کا وسیلہ بنتی ہے، اور پھر سب سے بڑی بات یہ کہ ادب بہت سی بے ادبی سے بچاتا ہے۔ آپ دیکھیں گے ہمارے ہاں سیاستدان اپنی تقریروں میں کس قدر اقبال کے شعر پڑھتے ہیں، और किस कदर गलत पढ़ते हैं। वो दरअसल वही मानी समझ रहे होते हैं जो वो कह रहे होते हैं। इकबाल तक उनकी नज़र नहीं जाती। यहाँ जब हम और आप इकट्ठे बैठते हैं, लोगों से बात करते हैं, तो मेरी बात मान लीजिए कि सारे मानी उन सवालों से समझ में आते हैं जो आप उठाते हैं। एक बात और भी है हमारे माशरे में कि हमने सवाल उठाना हराम कर दिया। सवाल पूछना, सवाल करना ज़बान से बुरी बात है, हाथ फैला के बेहद अच्छी बात है। उस सवाल की गुंजाइश है। अमीर वो सवाल बैंकों से करते हैं और जब बैंक उनके दामन भर देते हैं तो फिर दोबारा उनके पास नहीं जाते। गरीब अपनी ज़रूरत के लिए वो सवाल मुझसे और आपसे करता है और हम चंद सिक्के उसकी झोली में डाल के समझते हैं कि एक दुनिया उसको सौंप दी। लेकिन कुछ और अमीर भी हैं जिनके पास फ़िक्र की दौलत है, जिनके पास लफ्ज़ का सरमाया है, जो हर्फ की हुर्मत को जानते हैं। और जब मेरे जैसा उनसे कोई सवाल करता है तो वो माला माल करके भेजते हैं और ये सोचते हैं कि दिया तो उसको था, मिला मुझको है। ये अदब और तारीख़ दोनों की बात है। और सबसे एक और भी बहुत अच्छी बात हुई है जो मैं कहते हुए नहीं थकती कि हम अपने माशरे में दो चीज़ों से अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह बिल्कुल पाक हो गए, मुनज़्ज़ा। उनमें से एक चीज़ तहज़ीब है और दूसरी अखलाक। अब यह हमारा मसला नहीं रहा। तहज़ीब तो कहीं कमज़ोर लोगों का वतीरा और तरीक़ा होती है और अखलाक कमाल है। जिसकी जेब में नोटों से ज़्यादा प्लास्टिक के टुकड़े मौजूद हों, उसके सामने ज़िंदगी की क्या कीमत होती है। आप सोचिए कि कर्ज़ की पीते थे मैं और कहते थे कि हाँ, रंग लाएगी हमारी फाका मस्ती एक दिन। हम बहुत दिन फाका मस्त रहे, भूखे रहे और प्यासे रहे। लफ्ज़ से प्यास बुझाने के लिए, ख़याल को कहीं से कोई तवानाई का जौहर मिल सके, उसके लिए यहाँ जो लोग इस वक्त भी अपना इतवार का दिन गुजार के और इस घड़ी यहाँ बैठे हैं और अभी तक बैठे हैं और दरमियान में किसी जमाई या अंगड़ाई का वक्फ़ा भी नहीं आया है, वो उसकी बुनियादी कोशिश यही है कि इस पैमाने से एक बूंद भी मिल जाए तो हम सैराब हो जाएंगे। अफसोस ये है कि मैं जहाँ से आ रही हूँ वहाँ तरक्की के मानी सड़क बनाना है। मुझे नहीं मालूम कि आपके सूबे में तरक्की के क्या मानी हैं। पत्थर की सड़क बनाने को हम हर सरमाया लगा सकते हैं। एक मोहब्बत की पगडंडी बनाने को हम अपने दिल का ज़रा सा सरमाया नहीं लगा सकते। इस मुल्क को अगर किसी चीज़ की ज़रूरत है तो सिर्फ़ एहसास की ज़रूरत है। न हुनर की कमी है, न अक्ल की कमी है, न इल्म की कमी है। हाँ, एक ज़रा सा एहसास इसको छू जाए तो ये मिट्टी कुंदन है। आपके सब्र, आपकी तवज्जो, आपकी इनायत का बेहद शुक्रिया।
I'd like to say thank you to our founders, co-founders and our keynote speakers for the closing ceremony.